Millionaire lonely proposes marriage to an obese and poor woman, but days later she surprises him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. On a chilly evening, in the heart of a bustling city, a lonely millionaire, David Carter, sat at his lavish penthouse window overlooking the twinkling lights below. His empire, built from nothing, sprawled across various industries. He was a man with everything except love. His life, surrounded by wealth and luxury, felt hollow. He had it all: fame, fortune, and power, but still, he couldn't shake the emptiness that settled deep in his chest. After years of focusing solely on his business, he realized something profound. He wanted someone real. Someone who would love him for who he was, not what he owned. But the idea of finding that kind of person seemed impossible in his world of superficial connections. That's when he made the decision that would change everything. One evening, after a frustrating week of failed blind dates and empty conversations, David attended a charity gala. The event was extravagant, a sea of flawless suits and sparkling gowns. But in the middle of all the glamour, David's eyes were drawn to someone different. A woman, sitting alone at the back of the room. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she had no business being there. She was in a simple, faded dress, her face framed by messy hair, her figure fuller than most of the women David was used to. She looked out of place, yet there was something genuine about her that caught his attention. Something real. Sarah wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't wealthy, and she certainly didn't care about the glitz and glamour of the event. She was there because she believed in the cause. Sarah had worked hard her whole life, never asking for help. She had struggled with her weight, had faced countless struggles, but she had always kept going. What no one knew was that her life was at a breaking point. The small cafe she worked at was about to close, and with it, her only source of income. She was drowning in debt, and her family was no better off. But despite all of that, she had a warmth in her smile that was impossible to ignore. David watched her for a while, mesmerized by her sincerity. He noticed the way she helped others at the event, how she spoke with kindness, and how she seemed so unbothered by the wealth around her. It was a refreshing change. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. After a few drinks, David made his move. He walked up to Sarah, who looked surprised but didn't seem uncomfortable. "Hello," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with curiosity. "I'm David. I couldn't help but notice how passionate you are about the cause. I admire that." Sarah blushed slightly, glancing at him. "Thank you. I just think everyone deserves a chance, you know." David smiled, intrigued by her response. They talked for a few more minutes, and it felt natural, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. There was no agenda, no ulterior motives. Just two people connecting. That evening, as the event wound down, David made a proposition. He had been thinking about it for a while, and he knew it was bold, but his loneliness had pushed him to the brink. "Sarah," he said, after a long pause, "I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider marrying me? It's a contract marriage, nothing too complicated. I'll pay off your debts, help you secure a better future, and in return, I just need companionship." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. She had no idea what to say. It was absurd, it was risky, and yet, part of her couldn't resist the offer. Desperation and uncertainty clouded her judgment. After a long pause, she agreed. Little did she know, this agreement would lead to an unexpected journey, one that would change her life, and David's, forever. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself settling into a new, unfamiliar routine. The contract marriage was real, but it felt like a dream that seemed too good to be true. David had been kind, generous even, but his gestures felt detached, mechanical, as if he were just going through the motions. Every day, Sarah reminded herself that this was not a fairy tale. This was business, pure and simple. Her life, once filled with uncertainty, now had stability, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still on the outside, looking in. She moved into David's luxurious penthouse, a space so grand it felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic views of the city. Everything screamed wealth. But Sarah, in her faded clothes and modest demeanor, felt like an imposter in this world of opulence. She tried to adapt, to dress in the clothes David's personal stylist selected for her, but every time she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, she still saw the same woman who had once struggled to make ends meet. It was difficult to shake the feeling that no matter how much she changed on the outside, she would always be the same person inside. David, on the other hand, seemed more and more distant. They barely spoke unless it was about their agreement. There were no heartfelt conversations, no shared moments of laughter or warmth. It was as if they were two strangers living under the same roof, bound by a contract but not by any real connection. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized how much she missed genuine human interaction. She missed the simple conversations she used to have with friends at the cafe, the warmth of knowing someone truly cared. She missed feeling seen. As the days passed, Sarah's unease grew. She threw herself into work, volunteering at local charities and attending various events to keep busy, but it was never enough to fill the void. She could feel the distance between her and David growing wider. One evening, after attending a charity event together, Sarah was sitting alone in the living room, staring out at the city lights, when David walked in. He was dressed in a tailored suit, looking every bit the successful millionaire he was, but his face was tired. He looked at her, his eyes softening for the first time in days. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sarah hesitated before answering. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she could voice the thoughts that had been building inside her. "It's different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure if this is really my life." David sat down across from her, his gaze never leaving her face. "I understand," he said, his tone heavy. "This is not what you expected. I didn't want to make things difficult for you." Sarah could feel the sincerity in his words, but it wasn't enough. She had come to realize something important. David wasn't just the man she was married to on paper. He was a man who carried his own weight of loneliness. She knew that now. Despite everything, they were both searching for something. And maybe, just maybe, they could find it together. The conversation lingered in the air, an unspoken promise between them. That night, as Sarah lay in the guest room, she wondered if their arrangement could ever become something real. Could she let herself fall for a man who was, in many ways, still a stranger to her? Would he ever see her as more than just the woman he had married out of convenience? The answers felt elusive, but deep down, Sarah knew that their story wasn't over yet. There was still time for something to change, for something more to develop between them. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in her relationship with David. They were still living as strangers, bound by a contract, but there was a quiet shift between them. It wasn't immediate, but it was there. David started to ask more personal questions, ones that weren't related to the business arrangement. He'd ask about her childhood, about the dreams she had before this all began. Sarah found herself slowly opening up to him, something she hadn't done with anyone in years. One evening, after a long day at a charity event, Sarah sat on the couch, sketching in her notebook. She had always loved to draw, a passion that had been buried under the weight of her struggles. David walked in, fresh from his meetings, and paused when he saw her. "What are you working on?" he asked, his tone soft, not businesslike, but curious. Sarah looked up, surprised. She hadn't expected him to take an interest. "Just some sketches," she replied with a shy smile. "I used to draw all the time when I was younger." David walked over, his eyes scanning the notebook. "These are beautiful," he said, his voice full of admiration. "Why don't you pursue this? You're incredibly talented." Sarah felt a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks. No one had ever told her that before. "I always dreamed of opening my own art studio," she confessed. "But life got in the way. I had to take whatever job I could find to survive." David sat down next to her, his eyes focused on her face as if seeing her for the first time. "You deserve to follow your dreams, Sarah," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to settle for anything less." His words touched her deeply, but a part of her couldn't help but feel skeptical. Could she really have a life beyond the shadows of her past? Could David's words mean anything beyond just kind gestures? Despite her doubts, she felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. The next day, David surprised her with an invitation to an art gallery opening. It was part of a charity event, but David had arranged for Sarah to have her own space within the gallery to showcase her work. She couldn't believe it. It was a dream come true, one she hadn't dared to imagine for herself. The night of the event, Sarah was overwhelmed by the support she received. Guests were drawn to her work, and she found herself surrounded by people who admired her art, who saw her for the first time not as a struggling woman, but as a talented artist. David stood by her side throughout the evening, proud and encouraging. At one point, as they stood together near one of her paintings, Sarah turned to him, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. "I never thought I'd get a chance like this." David smiled, his eyes soft. "You earned it, Sarah. You deserve this, and much more." That night, Sarah realized something important. This contract marriage, which had started as a way to escape her troubles, had turned into something far more complex. She wasn't just a woman living under someone's roof anymore. She was becoming someone she hadn't recognized before, someone with a future, with hope, and maybe even love. And as she looked at David, standing beside her, she realized that he wasn't just a man she had married for security. He was beginning to mean something more. As the evening wore on, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, could this be the start of something real, something neither of them had expected? As the weeks went by, Sarah and David's relationship continued to evolve. The tension that had once lingered between them began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of familiarity. David, who had been distant at first, now found himself spending more time with Sarah, asking her about her dreams, her childhood, and the little things that made her who she was. He even began to appreciate her humor, something she had kept hidden for so long. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room of his penthouse, Sarah found herself sharing a story about her childhood, one she hadn't thought about in years. She laughed as she remembered the time she and her siblings tried to build a treehouse, only for it to collapse the moment they tried to climb in. "I can't believe we thought we could actually build something that big," she chuckled. David smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I think it's great that you always went after what you wanted, even if it didn't turn out as planned." For the first time, Sarah felt truly seen. It wasn't just her art that David was interested in now. It was her as a person. The change in their relationship wasn't just about the grand gestures, like the art show or the charity events. It was in the small, everyday moments, the quiet dinners, the inside jokes, the way he looked at her when she wasn't paying attention. As Sarah became more comfortable in her new life, she realized that she was beginning to fall for David. But a part of her still hesitated. Was this real, or was she just getting caught up in the fantasy of a life she never thought she would have? Could she trust that this wasn't just another transaction, another obligation for him? It was at a charity gala, a few weeks after her art show, that Sarah found herself confronted with the truth. David had invited her to the event, and as they mingled with guests, she noticed the way people looked at him, like he was untouchable, unreachable. She couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, David would ever truly be able to see her as more than just a companion in this business arrangement. The thought troubled her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the event itself. It was when they were alone later that evening, standing by the balcony overlooking the city, that David spoke the words Sarah had been dreading. "Sarah, I know this wasn't part of the plan. I didn't expect this to happen, but I have to admit something to you. I care about you, more than I ever thought I would." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned to him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. For the first time, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm not sure how this happened, but I've realized that I don't just want you in my life as a business partner, or even just a wife. I want you because of who you are, because of how you make me feel." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah felt her emotions rising, a mix of relief, confusion, and hope. Could this be the moment she had been waiting for? Could this be real? David reached out, gently taking her hand. "I never wanted to be like this. I never wanted to use someone as a means to an end. But you've shown me that there's more to life than just success and power. You've made me want something more, something real." Sarah stood there, her heart racing. She had never expected this, had never imagined that the man she had married out of necessity would feel this way about her. For a long time, she had kept herself guarded, unsure of whether she could ever trust anyone again. But now, standing in front of David, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a contract after all. Maybe they could create something real, something that neither of them had anticipated. As the night wore on, Sarah realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. A chapter where they could discover what love really meant, together. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself falling deeper into a world she hadn't imagined for herself. David's confession had shattered the walls she had built around her heart. No longer just an agreement. Their marriage had begun to feel like something more, a partnership, a friendship, even love. Yet, doubts still lingered in Sarah's mind. Could she truly trust that this was real? Could David's feelings be genuine, or was this just another part of his calculated world of success? The questions circled in her mind, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to embrace the possibility that something beautiful could come from this unexpected arrangement. David, too, had changed. He wasn't the cold, distant man he once was. He had become more present, more vulnerable, and more invested in Sarah's dreams. His support for her art was no longer just a gesture. It was a belief in her abilities, a belief that she was capable of much more than she had ever allowed herself to believe. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, David sat next to Sarah, his eyes thoughtful. "Sarah," he began, his voice serious, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night at the gallery. About following your dreams, about opening your own art studio. I want to help you make that happen." Sarah looked at him, stunned. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I mean," David said, "I want to invest in your studio. I want to help you take the next step. I know you've been hesitant, but I believe in you. I believe in your talent." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of opening her own studio for so long, but the fear of failure had always held her back. Now, here was David, offering her not just his support, but his resources, his belief in her. The weight of his words settled in her heart, and she realized how much he had come to mean to her. "David, you don't have to do this," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "This is your money, your business. I don't want to take something from you just because you're not taking anything from me." David interrupted gently. "You're building something for yourself, something you deserve." The sincerity in his eyes left no room for doubt. Sarah realized that he wasn't just offering her a chance to build a business. He was offering her the chance to build her life, her future. Over the next few months, things began to fall into place. With David's help, Sarah found a small space in the heart of the city for her studio. It wasn't the grand, luxurious space she had once imagined, but it was perfect. It was hers. It was a beginning. Sarah threw herself into her work, creating pieces that were more personal, more meaningful than anything she had ever done before. And as she worked, she felt something inside her shift. The fear that had once held her back began to dissolve, replaced by confidence, by a belief in herself that she hadn't known was possible. David, too, threw himself into supporting her. He attended her grand opening, standing by her side as she unveiled her art to the world for the first time. The event was a success, more than she could have imagined, and Sarah was overwhelmed by the support she received. But it was the look in David's eyes, the pride he took in her success, that made her heart swell. It was then that she knew this was real. This was the life she had always dreamed of, and it wasn't just about the art. It was about the two of them, building something together. In that moment, Sarah realized that she had found something even more valuable than her art. She had found a partner who truly cared for her, who believed in her, and who would stand by her side as they both navigated the future. The future, Sarah thought with a smile, was full of endless possibilities. As Sarah continued to work on her studio, she felt a sense of accomplishment that was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The fear that had once held her back was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was finally doing what she loved, and more than that, she was doing it with someone who truly believed in her. But as the days passed, she couldn't help but notice a change in David. He had been supportive, yes, but there was something different about him now. He was more distant, more absorbed in his work. The late nights in the office became longer, and the time they spent together seemed to dwindle. At first, Sarah thought it was just a phase. After all, he had always been a busy man. But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between them only seemed to grow. One evening, after a long day at the studio, Sarah returned to the penthouse to find David sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window. His face was hard to read, his expression distant. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. "David?" she asked softly, sitting down beside him. "Are you okay?" He turned to her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Sarah," he said, his voice distant. "Just a lot on my mind." Sarah could feel the tension in the air, the words unspoken between them. "Is it work?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Or something else?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's everything," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this arrangement." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words she had been dreading were finally coming. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned to her, his eyes filled with conflict. "I never intended for this to be more than just a business deal," he said. "But somewhere along the way, I started to care about you. I started to feel things I didn't expect. And now, I don't know what to do with them." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had known, deep down, that David had been struggling with his feelings, but hearing him admit it out loud was different. She had always wondered if he truly saw her for who she was, or if she was just a means to an end. "David," she began, her voice shaky, "I care about you too. But I don't want this to be a mistake. I don't want us to be caught in something we can't get out of." David reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I don't want it to be a mistake either," he said quietly. "I just don't know how to fix it." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt vulnerable. She had spent so much time building her life, focusing on her career, that she hadn't realized how much she had invested in their relationship. She had been afraid to let herself fall in love, afraid of getting hurt. But now, standing in front of David, she knew that she couldn't hide from her feelings any longer. "Maybe we need to take a step back," Sarah suggested, her voice soft. "Maybe we need to figure out what we really want, without the pressure of everything else." David nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think you're right," he said, quietly. "We need to take a step back and figure this out. Together." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt like they were on the same page. They weren't just two people living in the same house anymore. They were two people trying to figure out what came next, both uncertain and hopeful for what the future might bring. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Maybe this wasn't the end of their story. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new, something real. And as she lay in bed that night, David beside her, she closed her eyes, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time. The days that followed were filled with a quiet uncertainty. Sarah and David had decided to take a step back, to reevaluate their relationship and the future they both wanted. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They both knew that the connection they shared had grown beyond their original arrangement. But what did that really mean? Were they truly in love, or was it just the circumstances that had bound them together? David was still distant at times, buried in his work, but Sarah could see the struggle in his eyes, the internal conflict that had taken root ever since his confession. He didn't know how to navigate this new territory, and neither did she. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down and they were just two people in the same room, something shifted. One evening, Sarah sat in the living room, sketching in her notebook, when David walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her, as if trying to figure out how to approach her. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than she had heard in a long time. "Sarah," he began, sitting down beside her. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. And I've realized something." Sarah looked up from her notebook, her heart racing. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when David would finally open up and tell her what was on his mind. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of nervousness. David took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been running away from the truth," he admitted. "I told myself that I didn't want to fall in love, that I just wanted to keep things practical. But the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop feeling like you're the one I've been waiting for, even if I didn't know it at the time." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the words she had been longing to hear, but they came with a weight. She had always known that David cared for her, but to hear him admit it so openly was a revelation. "David," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion, "I've been feeling the same way. But I've been so afraid. Afraid that this was all just a mistake, that maybe I was just a solution to your loneliness." David shook his head, gently cupping her face with his hand. "No," he said firmly. You're not just a solution, Sarah. You're everything. You've shown me what real love is, what it means to care for someone beyond what they can give you. You've changed me in ways I never thought possible. The air between them seemed to crackle with the intensity of the moment. Sarah could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in what they had. The doubt that had plagued her heart began to fade, replaced by the warmth of hope. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she said softly. I want to take a chance on us, on this. David smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that made Sarah's heart swell. Me too, he said. I know we've both been through a lot, but I'm ready to make this work, to make you and I work. And in that moment, something shifted between them. It was no longer just about the business arrangement, the contract that had started it all. It was about two people finding their way back to each other, letting go of their fears, and embracing the possibility of something real. They had come so far, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, they were ready to face it together. As the night wore on, Sarah and David sat in silence, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that came when two people finally understood each other, when they no longer needed words to express what they felt. And as Sarah leaned against David, she felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. As Sarah and David's relationship continued to evolve, the undeniable connection they shared began to deepen. Their conversations were no longer about business or obligations, but about dreams, vulnerabilities, and what they both wanted from life. It was clear now, what had started as an agreement had blossomed into something genuine. But just when Sarah thought they were finally on the same page, life threw another challenge their way. It happened during one of their weekly dinners, a quiet evening at home where they could simply relax and enjoy each other's company. As they sat across from each other, a text message buzzed on David's phone. He glanced at it briefly, then placed it face down on the table. Sarah noticed the brief flicker of unease in his eyes, but she didn't comment on it. She knew he was still working through his own inner battles. It wasn't until the following day that Sarah learned the truth. David had been hiding something from her, something he hadn't wanted to admit. He had received an offer from a prestigious international business venture, one that could take him away from everything he had built. It was an opportunity that, on paper, sounded perfect. It could elevate his career, bring in more wealth, and cement his status in the business world. But it came at a cost. The offer required him to move halfway across the country, leaving behind the life he had just begun to build with Sarah. As Sarah sat across from David that evening, the weight of his decision hung in the air. I've been offered a chance to expand my business, David said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. But it means I might have to leave. It's everything I've worked for, Sarah. Sarah's heart sank as she listened to him speak. It wasn't just the offer that troubled her. It was the way he spoke about it, as if his success mattered more than what they were building together. David, she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. You've been given a choice, but so have I. We've been working so hard to find something real here, and now you're telling me that it's all about business again. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and frustration. It's not that simple, he replied, his voice tight. I've worked my whole life to get here. I can't just throw it all away for something that might not last. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to trust him, to let herself believe in their relationship. But now, the very thing that had brought them together, their shared dream of building something real, seemed to be slipping away. David, I don't want to lose you, she said, her voice breaking. But I need to know that you're choosing me, that we are more than just the business, more than just the contract. I need to know that this is real. David stood up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I've spent my whole life chasing success, but now I'm losing sight of what's truly important. Sarah stood up too, walking over to him and taking his hand. You don't have to choose between us and your dreams, she said gently. But I need you to realize that your life isn't just about what you can achieve. It's about who you have beside you, who you share it with. The room fell silent as they stood there, holding each other's gaze. For the first time, David truly saw her, not as a business partner, not as a means to an end, but as someone who was willing to fight for their love. And in that moment, he knew that he couldn't let go of what they had. The decision wasn't easy, But David knew what he had to do. He made the choice to turn down the business offer, choosing Sarah, their future, and the life they were building together. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was the right one. And as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he saw a future that was worth more than any business deal could ever offer. They had found something real, and he was determined not to lose it. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and David settled into a new rhythm. The tension that had once clouded their relationship now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of mutual respect and love. David had made the difficult decision to turn down the lucrative business offer, choosing to focus on their life together. It was a decision that, while not without sacrifice, felt right. He was no longer chasing the idea of success alone. He had found something far more valuable, someone to share his life with, someone who made everything else seem insignificant in comparison. Sarah, in turn, had fully embraced her newfound independence. With the help of David's support, her art studio blossomed, and it became a place where her dreams could finally take shape. The passion she had once hidden behind doubt was now flowing freely, and her work began to gain recognition in the local art scene. She felt empowered, not because of the money or the connections, but because she was finally living her truth. One afternoon, as Sarah prepared for her first solo exhibition at a prominent local gallery, David walked in. He had always been her biggest supporter, but today, his presence felt different, more profound. He smiled as he watched her set up the artwork. "It looks incredible," he said softly, his eyes full of pride. "I can't believe how far you've come." Sarah smiled, but there was something else in her eyes. A hint of uncertainty, a question that had been lingering in her mind for some time. She set down the painting she had been adjusting and turned to face him. "David, I've been thinking," she began, her voice tentative. "About us. About the future." He looked at her, his expression serious. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "I want us to keep moving forward," she said, her eyes locking with his. "I don't want to look back, and I don't want us to get stuck in the past. But I also want to make sure we're not just living for the moment. We've come so far, and I want this to last, David. I want to build something real with you, not just a dream." David's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want you in it. I want to be with you, to build a life together, one where we support each other, no matter what." Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was what she had always wanted, a partner who wasn't just there in the good times, but who would stand by her through everything. She smiled, feeling more at peace than she ever had before. "Then we'll build that future," she said, her voice steady and confident. Together. The night of the exhibition arrived, and Sarah stood in front of her artwork, surrounded by guests who admired her work. David was there beside her, his hand gently resting on her back, a quiet support that spoke volumes. As the evening unfolded, Sarah realized that this wasn't just a milestone in her career. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, the trust, the love, the sacrifices, and the growth. She had once believed that happiness was something she had to chase, something that existed outside of herself. But now, she knew the truth. Happiness was found in the connection they shared, in the life they were creating together. As the evening came to a close, David turned to her with a smile. "You were amazing tonight," he said, his voice full of pride. Sarah smiled back, her heart full. "We were amazing," she replied. "This is just the beginning." And as they stood there, side by side, Sarah knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. No longer bound by a contract, but by love, trust, and a shared dream. The future, for the first time, felt wide open and full of endless possibilities.